Good morning, everyone. This is Nicole Testa-Boston, the Deputy Director at FIATech, and we're glad all of you could join us this morning, where we're going to hear a little bit about the mobile enterprise, challenges, current identity assurance, and access methods. Before we go ahead and get started, though, I do want to just go over some administrative items on how to use the system if you've never used GoToWebinar before. First and foremost, you'll notice that you are on a defaulted mute setting. That's due to the number of attendees on the call. But we do encourage participation and welcome your questions, and you can do so by clicking the Questions tab on that toolbar. Type those in. Those will go directly to me, and periodically throughout the hour, we'll be facilitating a Q&A session with those. If we do run out of time, the speakers and presenters will get back to you to follow up with any questions that we don't get to. We also are recording this session, and we'll be posting it on our website at fiatech.org. And last but not least, that toolbar is unique to you. If you click that orange arrow button up in the corner, that will minimize that toolbar for you to give you an unobstructed view of the presentation. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce our speakers today. John Brandley is the Senior Vice President and founder of Me4Sure. John brings a professional services and communication industry perspective to securing the enterprise. Me4Sure provides comprehensive identity assurance and access management capabilities needed to protect the mobile enterprise. And Doug Foran is the Vice President of Marketing and Sales at Me4Sure. He's a serial entrepreneur working in the IT security space since the mid-90s. Doug has a long-standing background in the engineering and operational needs of discrete and process manufacturing. And for those of you who have been around FIATech long enough, know that Doug was also our key individual who helped us develop our strategic plan about 5 or 6 years ago. So he's been around FIATech, and you may have met him at a meeting or two, too. So with that, I want to thank both of our speakers for joining us, and I'll turn the reins over to you, Doug.
Great. Well, thank you, Nicole, and I certainly want to thank FIATech for giving us the opportunity to talk about something that's near and dear to our hearts this morning. And I also want to thank everyone who is on the line and listening this morning, and hope to have as interactive a time as we can. You know, one of the things that we thought we would do here is give you some ideas with respect to how the different perspectives with respect to the mobile enterprise. Right? And in particular, you know, information security, cybersecurity, it really starts with identity. And so we have want to give you an idea from a market perspective, what folks, what we're seeing out there today, and sort of some of the migration that has gone on in the commercial world in particular, with respect to the transformation of the enterprise over some time, and sort of give you a market background. And then John, who is a co-founder of Me4Sure, we would like him to give you the perspective of a product builder who is, in fact, trying to figure out how to meet the market demand. And John has a strong background in the telecommunications world, and that has driven a lot of the vision with respect to what we have built here at Me4Sure. So sort of with that as a background, I really wanted to start with what you see here in front of you. It's like, what's the case for strong authentication? What's going on in the mobile enterprise? And we were going to talk some today about system control and data acquisition security. Vern Williams had intended to join us. He is somehow lost down in cyberspace in Austin, Texas. And if he gets in here, we'll let him do his piece, but we'll have a quick review of that as well, and then move on to some of the product builders' perspectives. So where I would like to start is essentially giving you an idea about, well, what's going on. This is sort of a view of the corporation back in about the turn of the century, not that many years ago. And a lot of the things that we were concerned about from a securities perspective had to do with what was driving the enterprise at the time. There was, I'll call this sort of the integration phase, but it was really, there was a big effort for integration in the middle layers of the company and in the back-end systems. In fact, the questions were, well, how do we integrate? Application integration was a big deal at the time. From a security standpoint, people were concerned about how to pass credentials from one application to another. And it was, and there was a large question with respect to, do you integrate applications? Do you integrate at the database level? Do you integrate at the middle layer? And there was a lot of question about policy, and you probably, if you were around in those times, you saw a lot of people concerned about CORBA and web services and transaction processing, and web apps had just come on the scene, and the big deal back then was what they called straight-through processing. That is, how do I get from a web browser all the way through to the back-end systems that were storing the data and the applications that were going on. And the office world, there was rather autonomous out here, and also that had to do with the fact that bandwidth was very expensive at that time, and the connections were not particularly speedy, and so the security perimeter was well defined. And at that time, the notion of a militarized zone, CMZ, was in place. So I say this is sort of the.
I'm sorry, Doug.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hello? It's very different. Doug, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. It sounded like there was a lot of noise on the line.
There is, and I'm just wondering if, I don't know if that's John or not, but if we could just, if you're not speaking, mute your line, because it's difficult to hear you. Not you, Doug, but okay. John. If John can mute his line, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Sorry. So anyway, I call this sort of the integration phase, but the integration was really going on the middle layers and the back end layers, and then in the as we moved on, towards in the 2000 to 2007 range, what I'll call the other phase was the integration phase. This sort of started the exportation phase. We started to cost considerations, particularly, started driving people and services out of what we traditionally thought as the core of the corporation. And indeed, the security perimeter was starting to blur. People were starting to work at home. There was a lot more access from customer sites. People were trying to integrate their work processes. And, John Chambers, who's the CEO of Cisco, was introducing at that point the notion of the daily close. That is, he wanted to close the books on the operations of the worldwide organization every day, and wanted to put the infrastructure in place that would do that. Okay, so the security perimeter was getting less clear, and certainly the risks were starting to escalate. And somewhere, I don't know, around 2005, 2006, Bill Gates announced that username and password are dead. You may recognize whatever operating paradigm that you're using today for your authentication services, but certainly you would admit that the security perimeter was getting blurred. And a lot of the current security notions with respect to access and so forth was starting to break down. And in particular, a lot of you who are into control systems and so forth there was a notion of an air gap. Well, we're going to have all our networks are going to be internal to each one of our organizational elements that are, let's say, outside the core set of services or outside of the headquarters networks. And that air gap started to break down. And so I think that is the export phase started to move forward, and now we're into what I think I would call the mobilization phase of things. Okay, so the corporate core is shrinking, and the controls are highly centralized, but the operations have become completely decentralized, and there's this tremendous proliferation of devices going on. So not only do we have, PCs and smartphones and tablets, but we have all kinds of control systems that are being put in place that people use for something simple as, for example, the Target stores. I happen to be familiar with Target. I know they're a Theatec member. A good friend of mine was a logistics expert helping open, I think, what was the largest Target store in Denver at the time, and he said, Doug, you won't believe it. He said, but if I want the air conditioning changed, the temperature changed at the zone of the store, I call Minneapolis. And the same thing goes on with respect to the food cooling and freezers. It's all controlled from a central location. So we see this great proliferation of devices that going on. The work processes are getting tighter. So, for example, if you're running an industrial control system and it's by Siemens Corporation and you're doing it in Houston, Texas, well, there's a large possibility that that control system may well be accessed by a maintenance engineer from somewhere in Germany. So the work process is getting tightly integrated. The access is required from any platform. And sort of isolation, the old air gap idea has just completely broken down. And in fact, what we say now is, given this proliferation of devices, is that the identity actually defines the corporate perimeter. So this is an important notion for us because it is the one thing that is has to be secure above all things, which is the identity of the people that are trying to access corporate assets. And sort of to give you an idea of the pace at which this is happening, these are millions of devices sold in 2011. To give you some idea of what's of particular interest to us are the smartphones and the tablets and laptops, notebooks. I mean, these are all mobile devices. And so this last phase is the mobilization phase of the enterprise. What comes after that, I'm not sure. But the other thing is, if you look at the amount of information that is running across these mobile devices, the forecast is incredible. And glad we got a bunch of engineers, typically in the Theatec world, who understand the impact of exabytes. But as you can see, from roughly where we are today to where we'll be in 2015, it's what, maybe a 4- or 5-fold increase in just several years. So we probably have something equivalent of Moore's Law going on here with respect to the proliferation of data in the mobile world. So that's sort of a background context with respect to sort of what's driving the market. So what's driving the enterprise, and what are some of the things that we should be paying attention to? So I'll start in the middle, because managing and controlling corporate data anywhere. If you net it out, you talk to chief information security officers, that is the sine qua non with respect to what their job has to accomplish and what they are held accountable for. So at the same time, there's a couple of countervailing needs that go on. We've got to free employees to use their devices for work. And about 95% of employees are using their personal devices for work. So it's no longer cost effective. It's no longer effective in just about any dimension to try to restrict employees to using one device issued by the corporation. And the fact is policies don't work. Any CISO that you talk to and said, well, we've got a security policy that says you can't use your personal device for work. It's just not put in place. It's just destroyed. And at the same time, the need for strong protection is going up. So I've got lots of devices, I've got lots of endpoints, I've got to manage and control my data. So what are some of the things that a comprehensive access control approach, identity and access control approach might include? So one of the things that we think are important, a big security hole, is user-managed credentials. So you've got to close that, right? And you do have to basically be cross-platform from the day you start, because people are using their own devices, and you don't have a choice as to what device they're using, and the platform, which is basically Windows or iOS or Android, are the platforms of the future, certainly the platforms of today. And you need some facilities that go along with that, and the average corporate user, they probably have somewhere between 6 and 10 applications that they need access to do their work. And so this is a strong case for single sign-on. So there's a bunch of things that you need, and you also need a repudiation-proof authentication mechanism. That is, the corporation needs to know who's out there and who's accessing their corporate resources, and they need that with a high degree of certainty. And given that virtualization and the cloud world are upon us in a large way, then end-to-end chain of trust. So it's, in the old model, if I got you to the DMZ of the corporation when the perimeter was well-defined, I could trust all the other elements that you were going to touch because they were behind the corporate DMZ or the corporate firewall, and they were well protected. Well, once the enterprise became mobile and the corporate core shrank, the need to be able to have a chain of trust all the way through from the endpoint where the user is to whatever the asset that is running the application or storing the data, whether that's in the cloud or any other place, has to be, you have to be able to trust it. And so, the other countervailing piece is cost. So we have to be able to implement these security mechanisms without spending a lot of money. That means that don't disrupt the security schemes that I have in place, and give me a way to cheaply handle things like redundancy and failover and load balancing. Okay, so minimizing security costs are the big deal, and we think that these are some of the things that are extremely important in doing this, and I think John will talk about this a little bit later. So that is what I think is the sort of the market situational setup with respect to what's going on in the market today, where we are, how we're moving forward. And I think I see that our friend Vern Williams has joined us.
Yes. I muted a few of the, let's see. Vern, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Vern?
I didn't realize there was multiple levels of mute. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Vern. And you weren't on when we first started and weren't sure if you were going to join, so I do want to introduce you. Sure. Vern is the Chief Security Officer at the Patria Group, and Vern has built a career as an officer in the Nuclear Navy as an information security expert specializing in SCADA, emergency management, and industrial applications. So let's go ahead and...
See, I passed the baton to Vern.
I think you have to put your presentation back up, Doug.
Yep.
Because you have the presentation. You just closed it. And then you can just give your keyboard and give the keyboard and mouse to Vern.
Oh, I see what you want me to do. All right. Let me get that up there. All right, for some reason, can you see my screen?
No, but now I should. You dropped it, so I think I had it. There we go. Great.
All right, I think we're back on online here.
Perfect.
All right, you want me to drive this, Vern?
Sure. I'll just let you know when it slides.
Okay.
So go ahead.
And I think I was probably filling a little bit of time because I thought wasn't sure you were there.
Yes.
So,
well, okay. Let's go ahead and get into it. There's a number of areas where I've been active in the industrial control system arena or in emergency management areas, and one of the consistent things that we find is that people are relying on passwords at best, and in some cases, as we'll see in the SCADA, not even that. So getting on, and the key thing here is we have some critical impacts we can have on critical infrastructure, power production, power distribution, water, wastewater. All those things are areas where the control systems can really have a very short distance between an impact on the IT arena and an impact in the physical arena. If you've seen the pictures of the Aurora project where a diesel generator was basically torn apart through manipulation of the IT control circuits, you recognize that there can be some significant impact. Well, one of the problems that we have in the control systems arena is the weak identity proofing. People came in, started as a lineman, may have had another past, and now they're working on the IT systems and they're logged in and able to have a significant impact. So we need to go back and link the identity and make sure that we've got trusted partners on the inside. Passwords, when they're used, frequently end up posted in places they shouldn't, and in a lot of cases in the control systems arena, they're passed in clear text anyway. So if you can monitor the lines, you can you can become the operator. They've relied on physical control of who's sitting at the HMI or human machine interface console, and that sometimes is just a matter of a physical log, who's in the room at that point in time. And unfortunately, we even when there are actual controls to the door, we often find them propped open and bypass those physical controls. The operator often ends up logged in 24/7, and people come in and sit down in that seat and they become the operator. So there's no identity connection between the actions taken by the operator and the person who actually did it. As I mentioned, encryption is often not used. There's a lot of reasons why that is the case, but bottom line, that communication stream is not protected, and unfortunately the devices on the end nodes, the PLCs, are often they're 8 and 16-bit processors that have been around for 10, 15, 30 years in some cases. There's a common rule in that world. It's if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And the life cycle that we're familiar with in the IT arena is a magnitude of 10 different. We expect things to be replaced in 3 to 5 years. They're upset if it doesn't last 10 to 20. So those are that's kind of the environment that the SCADA systems are operating in. Next slide. So we next question is, okay, well, if this has been working for so long, why fix it? Well, the industrial control systems are beginning to get the attention of people who don't have your best interests in mind. Was recently at a vulnerability management event in San Antonio where a researcher who on his own time, not sponsored, had gone out and he had hoped to get 100 vulnerabilities in 100 days. Well, halfway through that, again, his funding, his time, he had a full-time job. He was able to get to 665, and he was only halfway through the time. By the time he finished, he had over 1,000 vulnerabilities identified, a lot of those present, directly facing the internet, and he was able to identify of those 1,000, at least 90 plus were immediately accessible or implementable as weaponized. So those vulnerabilities were immediately executable against those devices. And this is a list of some of the common vulnerabilities. So what do we need to do? One of the problems with the password access is if the operator ever gets disconnected or times out or whatever the problem is that breaks his access to the control system, that's a serious problem. So you need something that is robust, that enables quick access, that has a backup method for emergency access, and that typically includes some type of logging and alerting to the security staff. And one of the other problems we have is, if you have a lot of substations and other locations where there's not good physical controls, and if somebody gets in there, you want to ensure that their local access or remote access is also controlled. So those are some of the issues that we need to address. Next slide. One of the issues that has come up is that you no longer have the option of not knowing who it is that's accessing and causing things to happen. One of the issues there is legal liability. We have a particular action that is taken and results in damage, physical damage. There's often legal liability associated with that. And one of the things that has come into our court cases is the issue of due diligence by the company that has Joe sitting at the panel. So if they can't establish that they've got good controls in the procedures area, that they've got rigorous identity management in place, multi-factor authentication for critical systems, then they can be legally liable for rogue actions by an employee. Next slide. The other area, and we're currently deploying emergency management software that's been used to train at the Emergency Operations Training Center there in College Station. And one of the problems we've run into with the current products that are in the field is that they typically use username and password. And on a system where you bring 50 people into the system, and they each have identities that they hopefully only use very infrequently, either for drills or for an actual disaster. When the actual disaster happens, the pressure is high and people forget their passwords. Now you've got someone who needs to be putting the fire out or getting the ambulances to the right places, waiting to be able to log in. So moving that away from something you know to something you are and something you have becomes very important in this arena, something that very quickly gets access to solve that problem. And then the other question comes up is, okay, the fire chief is out at a conference in Los Angeles and you've got a fire here. You don't want him to get on an airplane and be out of contact. You want him to be able to help coordinate. So having a means of getting remote access in a way that has a high degree of assurance is very important. And then again, life and death decisions that need to be applied. So level of authority needs to be associated with a level of assurance. If I've got somebody dialing in from overseas, do I want them to make $1 million decisions or life and death decisions, or do I want them to be there as a resource and have somebody who's authenticated well? And the nice part is if you've got the ability to biometrically authenticate, you're on a corporate asset, a corporate laptop, but you're connected in over a remote network. If I've got high level of confidence in the encryption between them, then I can give that individual a fair degree of autonomy. So this gives the opportunity for people to have a mobile device to connect in, a laptop and connect in, and then even have that application with them, so that all they have to do is pass the data across the network to get into their role as the fire chief back in College Station, rather than out on a beach in Hawaii. And then one of the other things that's important is having the remote data accessible from anywhere. So I don't want to have, if the disaster takes out my emergency operations center, I need to be able to have people connect in via whatever means to a off-site. So having the ability to have a authentication gateway both in your local premise and, if you will, out in the cloud or in a hosted data center, where you have an alternative means of getting to that critical data you need to coordinate life-saving and disaster-preventing actions. Next slide. One of the key areas that we talk about is making sure that the person that you granted the authentication mechanism to is actually the person that you intended to. We have a number of our processes in a robust identity management infrastructure that enable us to bring a new employee in, vet who they are, find out what the appropriate permissions are. Usually in large organizations that means some kind of role-based access control, and then grant the identity. But one of the key components of that is the identity proofing. There's a number of different, in the federal government, NIST has a number of standards that can be very useful in helping, and I point people to the 800 special documents for that information. Next slide. So what we've got is we've got a kind of end-to-end process where you do the identity proofing, you grant the access that's required, you tie the identity and the roles to that individual. Then if you have some kind of a failure, you don't want total loss of access and the inability of that individual to do their job. So you want graceful failure modes. And then if you have a requirement to get access even though you would not normally, in the medical term it's called break glass, and we used to have the fire alarms. We had to break the glass to get in and actuate the alarm. Well, in this case, if I've got a patient and they have a medical record that I don't normally have access to, but I need to have access because they're on my table and I need to save their life, then you want that access, and then you turn on alerting and logging. And so that kind of finishes out from normal procedure to emergency access. Any questions? Next slide.
Well, I think that this is a good point that to bring in John Bradley and let us understand some of the issues that a product builder faces in trying to meet a lot of the requirements that we have been talking about from identity assurance and access management. John, you want me to just drive the screen and you can tell me when you want me to change the slide? Will that work for you? Or you want
Yes,
control?
Doug. Doug, that would work fine.
Okay, great. Here we go.
So, Doug and Vern touched on a lot of the elements that we hear from the different IT groups that we've spoken with in building our product. And when we built the product and took it from our view of the world, it was really that the standard security approaches today are broken. They don't work for a number of reasons with the complexities of all the elements that have been previously discussed here. And typical approaches try to focus on how do they secure all these different types of devices. How do you push software, some control mechanisms to all of the iPhones and the smartphones and tablets and home PCs, and it's daunting to even think about trying to do it that way. Plus, when you start to push out certificates through a PKI infrastructure, for example, or you're trying to manage software on multiples of thousands of devices, because most employees today have 3 to 4 devices that they'll connect with from work. They can connect from their home PC, connect from their smartphone, connect from their iPad or tablet, for example, and then maybe a corporate-issued laptop or PC. So adding that much complexity to an IT environment is just overwhelming. And the idea of trying to put more processes and responsibility on the user to do the right thing in the right environment is not a strong way to do security. I mean, we're all users, so we've all written down our passwords. We've probably shared passwords at some point to have somebody log in for us to do some type of transaction. And then the other is how do you ensure that people aren't moving corporate data onto personal devices, such as external hard drives. So adding more security policies and relying on the end user to follow those policies just has been proved to be very ineffective. And then, of course, restricting access at the cost of efficiency. And what we mean by that is that, I'm working from home, maybe on my home PC, maybe on my corporate PC. So, are we going to restrict access because of security, which is, of course, going to impact my efficiency to do my job? So we'll talk about how we've addressed that. And then, of course, a lot of the approaches today do require massive disruption of existing security schemas. They're going to require you to either integrate at the application layer. They're going to require you to break group policy objects, potentially put holes into the firewall that you may not want. The list goes on, and you're all aware of them. And then, of course, all of these things increase administrative workload. And all of us, having come from the IT environment, understand what it means to do more with less. And that couldn't be any more true than it is today. So, we got to try and keep our operations costs from swelling, and we've got to do as much as we can with the smaller teams that we have today. Next slide, Doug. So our approach is, how do you increase security without adding complexity? Well, our approach is that we focus on the person, then the platform, and the transaction path, because no organization, be it a Meet for Sure company that's trying to sell a solution, or you as a organization looking to purchase, can afford to integrate to every application. It's just not doable anymore. So what we did is we made an endpoint that is a secure, independent, intelligent entity, and we'll get into what that is. And what we do there is we basically marry each unique device to the user, and the user then's identity is controlled and maintained within the Meet for Sure environment. We use biometric and cryptographic technology, AES-256. It is policy controlled. The Meet for Sure solution is introduced as a member of the directory services environment. Typically, it's Active Directory, for example. And we also have no trace, so zero footprint on the host environment, meaning the USB host or the interface host environment such as the PC or smartphone. And we have the ability with our independent intelligent device to launch software from a secured separated file system, as well as we vet and log each transaction made from our secured endpoint device. The other approach we took is to protect the identity and access management path with hyper-encryption. So basically what we did is we developed some intellectual property that when our device is communicating with the server side of the solution, we basically stand up what we call a secure sync channel, which is a hyper-encrypted AES 256 COM platform that does not require the host, the network, or the enterprise to do anything special. And we'll talk about that here in a minute as well. So we built this SSE channel because SSL and VPN COM paths aren't always secure. In fact, they can be easily broken. They're replay attacks. You guys are familiar with all of them. So we built this SSE channel to strengthen those typical COM channels. And the way we've architected the solution, which is that the plumbing, if you will, doesn't require or force any type of big bang cutover. So there's no rip and replace. Doug, next slide. So the components of our solution, there are three primary components. There's the Me4Sure Authentication Gateway. This is the heart of the environment. Again, it's introduced to the client's environment as a member of the directory services environment. So for AD, it would be a peer. So AD is still the controlling entity of your environment. The gateway brokers all of the connections between all of the endpoints. So not only between our device, but also the destination point that the user is attempting to go to, i.e. an application, a web destination, a FAT client destination. And it enforces corporate security policies. And how we do that is through the administration console of the authentication gateway is where you set permissions. So I can set permissions on how do I want John Brandley to access based off what type of operating environment he's working from. So if I'm working on my home PC, on my home network, one of the rules may be that I can't access and download corporate data to my personal smart key, which I'll talk about in a second, or do single sign-on and present a different button list to the user based off what type of operating environment is in. So we do also have a fully capable single sign-on solution for web-based environments as well as a number of thick environments. And again, the gateway is what's managing and controlling the secure sync channel, and there are multiple management consoles. So it's set up so that no one admin can do every function. So you are basically, especially regulatory environments, can meet and exceed regulatory requirements and try and control if an admin goes rogue, to be quite honest with you. So the secure sync channel I chatted about just a little bit ago. The other is what we call the personal smart key. As you can see from the picture, it's in the form of a USB flash drive device, but it is a very intelligent device. Doug, go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Next slide. There we go. So the device itself, the PSK, is a computer within itself. We're running a 32-bit microprocessor that has our onboard light version of real-time operating system. It also has embedded OS. It runs a 256-bit fully functional encryption, de-encryption engine. Has an A to D, D to A converter, as well as all PSKs have their own random number generator that interfaces with the authentication gateway that has a random number generator. So there are no static keys. There are no replay attacks across that SSC channel. Nothing's ever passed in the clear. It's run across that hyper-encrypted channel. We also run eMMC memory up to 128 gigs of memory that is secured by first biometrics, second by encryption, and third as it's a separated file system that is gated by also policy controls. So you can control when a user is allowed to access anything that they may store on the PSK from what type of environment they're in. So back again to, I plug my device into a non-domain asset. The policy may be, the rule is that I can't access that data. We also have on the device the biometric reader, which has its own microcontroller. So we've built the biometric data. We're using Authentext readers, but through SDK we've written a lot of enhancements for our solution to read biometrics, different age groups, different minority groups. The health and people can impact greatly how biometrics are read, so we've been able to adjust that and have very, very strong success. There's also a 7-segment display where we can display messages and a one-time PIN, for example. And then on our latest device, we have a Bluetooth, secured Bluetooth radio chip on the device so that you can communicate with such things as iPhones and iPads. In fact, we are Apple certified to interface with those devices. So, Doug, one more slide, please. I know we're running out of time, so I'm trying to move through here pretty quickly.
Great.
So basically built into our solution, you have absolute non-repudiation level authentication, because what happens is once a user enrolls biometrically to the PSK through the enrollment process, the very last step is they enter their current domain credential. At that point, the authentication gateway registers that device as active, creates a new credential for that user, and notifies, for this discussion, the Active Directory Credential Manager of the new credential for that user. So now only AD and the Meet4Sure Authentication Gateway know the user's credential. So the user no longer knows their credential. That expands into single sign-on. So through our single sign-on controls and wizard, you can either use AD credentials for any domain applications, and you can have the authentication gateway create a credential for any non-domain applications where obviously you don't want to use an AD credential for access. We also have built in for virtual desktop interface controls. Citrix Zen, for example, is one that we use a lot of. We also have the ability to control access and control to VPN clients. So again, the user no longer has to know the password to launch a VPN client. And then, of course, the secure storage. So basically what happens is you connect your PSK to whatever endpoint device, either through Bluetooth or through the USB connection. The device will get power either from the device it's physically plugged into or to a power sled that we have. The PSK comes alive. At that point, the PSK is going to do a self-interrogation of itself, both physically and logically. We do put an epoxy coating on all the devices so they're protected from a physical attack. If it passes its integrity check, it then calls up the AG and simply asks, am I an active device? If the device has been deleted, we'll use that term, then at that point the kill command is executed at the device is wiped to all Fs. If it passes that stage of being an active device, then the PSK will evaluate the environment of the US or of the host environment. Is this host a member of the AD environment that the PSK is issued from? And is this host on or off net? Based on that evaluation through controls at the AG, the PSK will only behave in the manner that you want it to behave. So I'm on my corporate PC on my home network. Launch of the PSK will recognize that. It will force the user or automatically launch a VPN client. It will establish the VPN client. It will log the user onto their domain PC. And at that point, then the user is presented with the Meet4Sure client. And through that client is where you give the access controls of what you want that user to be able to log into. So it's a very strong security solution that's non-disruptive to the corporate enterprise. That's very simple for the end user to adopt and use. Simply plug it in, swipe your finger, and what you're allowed to do is what you're presented with. No longer are you dependent on the end user now to make those decisions. And you have full control over where that user goes, when they go there. You're logging how they got there, what type of environment they came in to get there. So you have full logging capabilities. And all of that data can be exported to all standard reporting tools. So definitely compliance from a regulatory standpoint. And again, it's not something that requires a cutover. So because we don't integrate at the application, it's not a one or nothing. You could have 10 people, you could have 1,000 people start out on day one on the Meet4Sure solution and migrate people over to it as you see fit, while the rest of your organization is logging in through the standard mechanisms they use today, even if they're using other security tools such as a VASCO or a RSA Secure ID. We can interoperate with the operating environments as you have them set up today without any disruption. So, Doug, I think I tried to stay within the time limit here to give some Q&A.
That's great. Yeah, I was going to say if there was, Nicole, I don't know if you've collected questions or not.
Well, I think we have a bunch of shy folks or folks who missed out on the instructions at the beginning, but if you do have any questions that you want to ask our presenters, you can just use the questions tab on the toolbar, and those will come to me and we can get those asked and answered by our panelists. I guess I would just start by asking, what is the biggest challenge, I guess two questions. What is the biggest challenge you see for companies in adopting this, and what industries do you see leading in recognizing these issues and finding innovative solutions?
Yeah,
right.
Nicole, this is John. So being the founder, one of the co-founders of the company, and having this technology now for a few years, initially the resistance was, here's another device that we have to carry around. And that was a big hurdle. But as the challenges that we've talked about today have come about, it's now we've simplified it, that here's one device that is protecting all of the endpoint access methods. So that side now is being adopted as, if you will, cool. Here's one thing we can administer, we can distribute to our users, and we don't have to worry about what type of phone they're coming in, what type of PC, because all the processing, all the transaction interfacing, and all the software support is being done off of the Meet4Sure PSK. So you don't have to now push software and certificates to all of these devices to make sure that they're known, accepted devices. That's been the challenge. The industries where we're having the greatest success is obviously in the regulated industries, specifically the financial services industries, where they need to meet constantly changing and evolving security requirements. And we're also now seeing a lot of growth in the healthcare. And we do have some interaction deep inside the DoD realms as well.
And the other thing I would add to that, Nicole, is that for all my friends who are in the industrial side of things and in heavy commercial, if I can put it that way, we have been whistling past the graveyard on this particular subject for a long time, and the I think recently, probably everybody heard about the tritium incident. This is a company that has software that's used to control a tremendous amount of devices throughout the country, sort of in the telematics space. And, you know, the username and password just doesn't hold up in that area any longer. So the regulated guys have led the way, but the industrial folks, I think, are rapidly coming to the awareness that this is an exposure that is easily closed and have to act on it. Vern, maybe you have a story about that as well.
Yeah, no, in the tritium area, they're running into some significant issues. They just released the ICS CERT released a vulnerability announcement, and the number of, if you look, Shodan is a tool that you can use to identify interfaces, and there are a huge number of internet-facing control systems, for this tritium, and all of those are vulnerable. So it's a pretty serious problem.
Yes.
Yeah, we have a board member who recently said at a meeting, he said you can start looking at companies as those that know that they've been breached and are doing something about it, and those that just don't know. But
yeah, no, that's valid.
And I guess this is John. I guess the last comment I'll make for folks, because I'm sure the question there is, cost. And I will say that the way this is priced out, it's all bundled, and it's typically less than what you're paying for to do password resets today. So again, I think it's a very compelling solution. We've been recognized as the most innovative next generation security solution at the RSA conference this past year, and I'm very proud of what we built, and look forward to hearing from folks.
I think we must have some shy folks on the call because I'm not having questions coming in, but would you be able to give your contact information so they could follow up with you, like an email address perhaps?
Absolutely. And I assume that we'll have a list. We can mail that information and maybe a copy of the slideshow to everybody?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great.
So we'll do that.
What we will do.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining. Go ahead, Doug.
No, I just wanted to, on behalf of me for sure, I wanted to thank everybody who attended today. Thank you for Theatech for giving us the opportunity to do this, and maybe there's an opportunity for us to get a little more focused on some of the issues that are brought up in the future. We'd be happy to do that.
Absolutely, yeah. I think this is definitely an up-and-coming topic that's gaining more traction in our industry, and we will definitely be following up with you. Thank you, John and Vern and Doug, and everyone have a great day. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, everybody.